Nate back here with you, the High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. So today we're going to continue the second part of the hair barrette, and we made it off of a pattern, off of a kit from Tandy, and ours is a little heavier leather. Last episode we did the pattern cutout, we stamped it, did a little bit of beveling on the front finished edge, and today we're going to dye it, make the stick, and finish it up. So come on in and let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and put some dye on this, and then we'll work on the stick, and then that way that'll give our dye a chance to dry. So let's take out our old stained dye board here, protect our work surface. And just a reminder, if you haven't seen the first episode, this is what the bow turned out to be, the barrette, after stamping. We are going to use some Fibings mahogany leather dye today. So we're going with a mahogany look. I've got a microfiber towel, and then I've got just a white little shop towel here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put on my protective gloves. And I've got a small container here, a little throwaway plastic container, my wool dauber, and then my Fibings mahogany dye. Shake that up real good. Pour some in my container. I like to wipe off any excess, keep that original container nice and clean. So then I'll take my barrette, put a little bit of dye on my dauber, and then start working that dye into that piece. Now, depending on how deep your stamping is, will depend on how much dye you need to place on there so that it soaks down into those stampings. And that's one coat. I'll take my microfiber cloth here and just wipe off any excess on the top. And that also not only wipes off the excess, but it evens out all of the dye that was on the finished surface. So you can see the dyed finished side. Next, I'll take my dauber, dip it into the container, and I'll do all the edges. And anytime you get into a smaller piece, it makes it a little more difficult to do the edges. You get into tight spaces. And this time I'll take my white cloth and just work around the edge and wipe any excess off. I like to use a microfiber on the surface most of the time, on the finished surface, because it keeps it nice and soft looking. Doesn't slick it up. So then let's go to the back side, and that's the rough side. And normally it'll take a little more dye than the finished side. And we'll let that soak in real good. Make sure it's coated really well. Let it sit for a second, and I can take my white towel here and I'll just daub it and take all that excess off of the surface. That'll even that color out a little bit, and it'll also make it dry much faster without having all that excess dye on there. So let's set that aside. And I can take my excess dye that I have left, and if you've watched my videos in the past, you know I don't like to put that back into my original container because I don't like for it to contaminate anything off of that leather back into my original container. So I'll take that little throwaway shop towel, throw it in there, let it soak up the excess, and then I'll throw that away in the trash. And then at this point, let's take this piece of cardboard out of the way, and let's move this work surface over. And here's the original kit from Tandy and the stick. So what I did was I took the stick, measured, I gave myself just a little bit more, made it a little longer than the original, and cut that off of a 3-foot piece of dowel, and this is 5/16. So I'm going to take this piece of looks like it's 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to work on this at an angle on the point, and as I'm working on that, I'm rotating it. So the whole time I'm going back and forth, I'm rotating that in my hand, and I don't know if you can see, but I'm starting to get a rounded tip. So what we're looking for is we want to get down to a point, not quite as sharp as a toothpick, so that it'll go through the hole of the Burrette really easy. And that is a 5/16 hole. So as I work this down, sanding, I'm constantly turning that dowel in my hand. So with every stroke that I make, I'm actually turning it ever so slightly, and what that'll do is that'll keep that nice and even, so that when I do get down to somewhat of a point, and you can see I'm getting there, it should be even all the way down. So just keep continuing to go back and forth, spinning ever so slightly with each stroke, and it is getting fairly close. And you can change the angle as need be, so stop and look at it, check it out once in a while. You can see we're starting to make some progress here. Now, obviously you could use a power sander, be much quicker, maybe a little Dremel with a sander on it, but this dowel rod's fairly soft wood, so it's not really going to take a long time to do it by hand, and I wanted to make sure that you could see how easy it would be to do it by hand, and not, if you didn't already have a power sander or a Dremel, that you wouldn't have to go out and buy one, that you could do it by hand fairly easy. And then you can go the other direction as you rotate it also, and that'll help knock off some of the roughness. And also round down that transition from the neck area to toward the point. So, not too bad. Fairly easy to do. The other end was the factory end, so I'm not concerned about doing anything to that. So what we want to do is take our Burrette and kind of fold it over, bow it around like it would be in your hair. Let's push that through one end, and there it is. I think what I'll do is put just a little bit of dye on that wood dowel, just to give it a little bit of color. And you can hear how tight that is. It's not going to come out, but if you squeeze that, if you try to pull it out like that, it's going to be in there. It's not going to fall out. If you want to pull it out easily, just squeeze that and it'll slide right out. So let's take just a tiny bit of that mahogany dye, and I'm going to use a foam Q-tip. Move this back out of the way. I'm going to put a small piece of cardboard on my granite here. And I'm not going to need very much of this at all. So all I'll do is take it out of the lid. I'm just going to wipe that on the stick, on the dowel. Turn it over. That's a really pretty color. And that dye is going to act just like a stain would on the wood. So it's going to bring any type of grain or put just a little tiny bit on the end there. I'm trying not to get any more on there than I need to. That's why I'm rubbing a little bit harder on the tip. And I'll take my microfiber towel again, wipe all the excess off of it. And let's go ahead and bend it a little bit. Put our dowel in. And there's the finished product. Now, if you want to, you can put a little bit of protectant on it. Got some Vibing's leather sheen, and I do use that quite a bit. And what that'll do is that'll protect it a little bit, and it'll also give a little bit of shine to it. So normally I let my leather dry for quite a while before I put that on, but today we'll go ahead and put some of that on there, and let's see what kind of a difference it makes. That's a new bottle. I'll put it back. I don't want to open a new bottle if I don't have to. And we'll use this microfiber towel to put it on with. So, just like the dye, we'll shake it up real good. This stuff goes a pretty good ways. You can always add more. The more you add and buff, the shinier it gets. So, and all I do is wipe it on, and I just keep wiping until it finally just dries. And what that's doing is that's soaking into that leather just like the dye did, but it's also putting a hard sheen or coating on top of that to protect it. So it doesn't look like any of the dyes coming off. And then once you think you have plenty of sheen on there, you can go to a dry part of your cloth, let that dry for just a second, and then you can buff that. And it will turn dull at first when you start buffing it, and then the sheen will start coming out. So at first you're thinking, well, all that did was make it dull, but the sheen will come out if you keep buffing on it with a dry cloth. And I'm using very, very light pressure. I'm not using heavy pressure, just light pressure. So I'm just just barely buffing the surface. And you can see from the light how much of a shine or a sheen that gives to it. So now, if we put our stick back in, and you want to put a protective coating and a sheen on it, there's your finished product. So here's the kit that was from Tandy, and you can see the thickness of the leather compared to the thickness of this leather. But there's ours in mahogany. Well, there's another project completed, and this time we just did it in 2 episodes. So this is something that you can do fairly cheap, easy to do, very few steps, and you end up with something very nice that's usable and could even give these away as gifts. So there's another project in the books. Come back next week and we'll start a new project, and next time our project is going to be a guitar strap, and we are going to be doing some carving on that guitar strap. So come on back next time, and as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.